Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt ZAUN. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. 13 years ago, I was at an event and I saw people circling around a man on the opposite side of the room. They were shaking hands, laughing, and sharing stories. Naturally, my immediate thought was, who is that? I watched in amazement as this individual, quote unquote, worked the room. He shook every single hand in that ballroom. I was amazed at how this individual had the ability to connect with everyone that came in his path. It would be years until I'd realized the impact this man had on the community I lived in. The person I'm talking about is TERENCE FARRELL. It was an honor and privilege having Terence on the Stories of Traction podcast 4 months ago. Since our last conversation, I've actually received a few messages from people asking to dive deeper into the political arena regarding that podcast episode. I will include the last episode that we had in the show notes. You can click and go check it out. It's called Stories of Leadership. For those of you who are not familiar with Terence Farrell served as a Chester County Commissioner for 12 years. Before that, he was the Recorder of Deeds for 8 years. And today, he is the president of For Real Solutions, which is a consulting firm that brings value to its clients through leveraging Terence's knowledge, experience, network, and creativity. Two of the major focuses for his business are reducing healthcare costs for various organizations and mitigating loss in pension funds that occur because of fraud or other illegal activities. Welcome back to the show, Terence.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, and I appreciate what we dove into last time. I know we had a lot of different angles last time, diving into your background. We had talked about your parents and the significance that they had on your life. And we started to dip our toe into your political involvement. But I wanted to have you back because I have received numerous messages from people because I think there's a lot of interest in the political world, especially today. And I want to unpack that. Here's why I want to unpack it. Because we hold devices in the palm of our hand, and because investigative journalism is, if it's not dead, it's on life support. The problem is a lot of times people, when they're viewing news, it's not necessarily local news. A lot of our conversations are focused on national news. And I really feel that people are missing out on something that's extremely important. Because as you know, Terence, the likelihood that most people listening to this episode are actually going to have a private conversation with the President of the United States, regardless of what side of the aisle that individual represents, is very rare, right? But they more than likely would come in contact with a county commissioner. And it's amazing how much county commissioners have an even significant effect on a lot of our lives, our day-to-day, than what's happening in Washington, D.C. And a lot of people aren't really focused on local politics. So I want you to kind of spell out for us what a commissioner does, what people may be surprised that a commissioner does, and something that you would like people to take away as just they can get an understanding of what's happening at the local level, because a lot of our conversations are drowned out by national news.
Well, thanks, Matt. First of all, I want to underscore what you said about the importance of local politics versus national or even state politics. The impact that the local politics, the local political entities have on a person's life, significantly more important than the President of the United States, even those who are running or serve in Congress, even those that serve in the state legislature. You mentioned my role as a commissioner, as important, perhaps even more important on someone's pocketbook, are the local school boards. Those folks are elected, they're not paid, they're all volunteer, but particularly in our locale in Pennsylvania. The greatest property tax, is levied by school boards. Secondly, by counties, and third by the local municipality. Now, throughout the United States, that might not be the same because there are different jurisdictions that do different things different ways. But a county commissioner, at least in the Pennsylvania structure, there are 3 county commissioners in each of the 60, well, most of the 67 counties in Pennsylvania. Some of the counties have what's known as home rule, which is a slightly different system. But the county commissioners are the executive branch. They're also the judicial branch. They are basically all 3 levels of government. They have the power, the commissioners have the power of the budget primarily. They set folks' taxes. They hire and fire. They set policy, important policies, such as whether the county is going to preserve open space or not, and other policy issues. So the county commissioners cover the whole range of what happens at county government and are responsible for everything that happens. If something bad happens on the county commissioners' watch, it bubbles up to them, even if it might have happened in a specific, what was called a row office, one of the sub offices that run, say, the Recorder of Deeds office, or not. An interesting thing that would happen at the commissioner's office would be, an interesting thing would be the number of folks that would actually reach out to, and this is once again to underscore the impact local government has on an individual. The best experiences I had were when someone would reach out to me as a county commissioner with an issue, with a problem. Maybe they've contacted another branch of county government but got no satisfaction. And so they would reach out to me and my assistant would put them through. I always took calls, and I would be able to, in a couple of minutes, because of my experience, point them in the right directions, maybe connect them to department head, whether it's the treasurer or the controller or Recorder of Deeds, Register of Wills, one of those, and solve that person's problem. I think that's really what I enjoyed most about being a county commissioner, is that ability to impact an individual person in a very, very positive way. Broadly, we spent millions of dollars each year on preserving open space, which was a benefit to all the residents in Chester County. But that was a general impact, a general positive thing that was happening. But the impact on an individual really left me glowing at the end of the day. Was there a third part of that question, Matt? Would you like to repeat that?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate what you mentioned so far. I think it's really important for people to understand that. I think there's a tremendous amount of confusion right now, and rightly so. I think a lot of our conversations are dictated by news outlets, right? So regardless of what news outlet people watch that are listening to this episode, that's not the point of this, but news today is a profit machine. And in order to get clicks, they have to rely on clickbait. A lot of these are emotionally driven stories and experiences and situations to get people to read and dive into different articles. And I think what it's done is it's created massive confusion for people and hopelessness. It's very rare that you come in contact with someone that is just excited and fired up about the direction of where the nation's going, regardless of what political ideology that they really grab a hold of. It's very rare that you get the majority of people that you speak to that are just fired up about that. And I think it's because they're so focused on the national conversations. So a lot of people listening to this might want to get involved, but they might have that sense of hopelessness that they can't change Washington or they can't change different aspects of what's happening. So for people that are of that camp that they might have wanted to get involved, but they just don't know where to start, what would you recommend that they do?
Well, as I've seen along my path, there are basically 2 ways to get involved in local politics. One is through an issue. It might be a school board issue. Someone's going to build a new school, or school board's going to raise taxes, and it fans a groundswell of either opposition or support, and someone who leads that movement might be elected at the next time. So that person may or may not have had previous political experience, but because they come into the limelight as a leader of this particular movement, either in opposition to or in support of a certain issue, they're catapulted into the forefront of the political consciousness. And, next time there's an election held, they run. And sometimes they're successful. For me, the other way was my pathway, and that is basically starting at the bottom as a volunteer, getting involved in helping other people get elected, getting involved in supporting a particular issue or opposing a particular issue, and then working your way up through the political ladder. I started that way, and that's how I became a county commissioner ultimately. I got involved as a volunteer when my kids were really young, and as they got older and my wife allowed me out of the house to attend other meetings, I got involved in supporting candidates, helping with minor fundraisers, whether they were, sub sales or a golf outing or something. And then ultimately, I became a committee person, which is a very powerful elected position, serving in my local precinct, standing out at the polls, twice a year at elections, and then became area chair, and then ran for what is known in Chester County as a row office. That you mentioned, the row office I was ultimately successful in being elected to, and that was Recorder of Deeds. Served there 8 years, but used that experience, used that opportunity really to refurbish the office, bring it into the 21st century, and use that as a platform to say, look, I've done this. I can be a successful Recorder of Deeds, and I also can be a successful commissioner. Use that platform, ran for commissioner in 2007, was elected, ran again in 2011, was reelected, ran again in 2015, and was reelected. So I served 3 terms or 12 years. So working your way up through the ladder, political ladder, is the other way. I do recommend, that people get involved in whatever capacity they can at the street level, at the block level, and make a contribution there. And people will recognize your contribution and, promote you, come to you and ask you to run if you've really put your heart and effort into making a very positive contribution.
Yeah, so let's unpack elements of starting at the bottom, but using the verbiage that you had mentioned. So, and again, because people listening to this, they're not going to call the White House and get a one-on-one meeting with the president. They're not going. It's very rare that they're going to get in touch with the U.S. Senate office and actually be sitting across the table from a U.S. senator, a week or so later, right? I mean, it's extremely rare. So let's talk about what can be done. So for anyone listening that has ever wanted to get involved, this is something that you can almost do immediately, because there's local races that happen all the time that they need volunteers. A lot of them would be more than willing to have you knock doors for them, drop off literature, come to events. There's so much that people can do to get involved. So I want to kind of unpack a little bit of that. So if someone is interested in the political arena, what are some things that they could do? I know you had mentioned like school board, you'd mentioned committee. What should someone do as if they hear this episode, and a week or so from now we're in the summer months, what would you recommend that they do to prepare for the fall, to get involved in local campaigns?
Well, I think one of the things to recognize, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, is that there is a political structure of both parties. Both parties, have committee people that serve at each precinct, and a precinct is where the people vote. So find out who your committee people are, reach out to them, let them know that you're interested, and they will hopefully, put you into the process of getting involved. The second way to do it is reach out directly to a candidate. Maybe you know who's running for school board. Maybe they live down the street. Get in touch with that person and let that person know that you're interested in supporting them. It might be as simple as putting a yard sign in your yard. It might be, as you suggest, knocking doors or making phone calls, or, perhaps just speaking up and letting your neighbors know that you're supporting this particular person. So those would be the two immediate ways: connect with your committee person, connect with a candidate.
Yeah, I like that advice. That's very practical advice. When I was in school and I was doing odd retail jobs, I remember thinking to myself, this is really good for people to do because you understand interactions with people, right? And then when I became a father, I made it a point for my kids getting involved in the political process. I wanted them to see different elements of negotiation, what it's like to be at these different tables. I've taken all three of my kids door to door with me on multiple campaigns. It's been wonderful for them to experience it. I always challenge people to get involved in the political process. One, it's very eye-opening, but also, regardless of where you are, it will refine your skills. I can't tell you how many CEOs that I've come into contact with that I recommend they get involved in campaigns, and they do, and they're bewildered with how much it refines their skills, public speaking skills. Again, that negotiation skill aspect, just dealing with people in general. I think it's a really good skill to have. So let's take it from that angle. What would be some of the skill sets that you've seen people having those skills refined by being involved in the political process? Anyone maybe that has been a part of your team, Terrence, or maybe you've worked for, or anyone that you have supported? Have you seen this progression and development of them as people?
For sure. And, once again, I'd like to underscore or highlight something you said. You said as a parent, you're encouraging your kids to get involved in the political process. And fundamentally, that's how I got involved in the political process. My parents were active politically. My mom served on the school board way back in the last century. My dad was involved, and we talked politics at the dinner table. And this was when there was only 3 television stations, and we'd listen to Walter Cronkite in the evening and discuss the news and the importance of being involved, locally. So, once again, in terms of being civically minded for all those parents out there, whether they're CEOs or non-CEOs, whoever they are, not only get involved, but encourage your children to get involved. Set the example that this democracy we have only works when people get involved, when people step up and support others, when people step up and become candidates, et cetera. Now, to your specific question about skill sets that are useful and can be developed over a particular time, you mentioned just the interaction with people. I think, to be a good politician, you've got to like people, and you've got to like to interact with them. You've got to like to hear their stories. Where did they come from? What's on their minds? What things interest them? And then you've got to be willing to and interested in sharing your own story. This is my background. And in that conversation and that sharing of stories, often you'll find synergies. Well, I didn't know that you were interested in X, Y, or Z. Maybe we can get together later on and talk about, preserving open space. Maybe we can talk about, helping the fire company, raise money in their capital campaign. So being willing to engage with people, I think, is fundamental. You've got to like people. I mean, there are some politicians who've made it who seem to be standoffish, but I think they're the rare bird. And also, as you rise through the ladder, as you become more and more the politician, the person that is asked to speak at various events, just the ability to be a good public speaker, is a skill that you can refine by public speaking. They say practice doesn't make perfect. It's perfect practice that makes perfect. So the more you do something, the better you get at it. My own journey and I related this last time we spoke, was the realization that when I'm speaking to an audience, when I'm speaking to an individual, they don't know what I'm going to say. So even though, I don't complete the thought, I recalled how I was speaking before a group at the committee. I had a script all laid out in my head, but 2/3 of the way through it, I forgot what I was going to say, and I stopped. And then people started applauding. And at that moment, I realized, I've delivered my message. They don't know that there was more to the message, and they're applauding me because I came and I spoke. And that was a turning point for me, just to realize that, what I'm coming to say is not necessarily what they're coming to receive.
Sure. That's a really good point. That's a really good point. And yes, it is good to like people to be in the political world. Going back to the way I opened this segment is talking about watching you as an elected official. I've had the opportunity now for many years to witness you at events, kind of see how you interact with people. And you have a magnetic personality. People thoroughly enjoy being around you. I mean, my wife actually mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about just local politics, and your name came up about how much she really appreciated every time she was at an event. You knew her, you knew a little bit about her background, her story, and she gravitated towards being in a conversation with you at an event. She really appreciated that. Was that natural, or do you think that was a refined skill that you developed over time?
In part, it was natural. I mean, I've always liked people. I've always liked the interaction, the social aspect of being a person. But I did work at it. Whenever I saw Courtney, I would, recall her name. Now, subsequently, as I've interacted with perhaps 10,000 people, perhaps more, I've relied upon my smartphone to take notes,
Sure.
about people, about people's names, where I met them, some of the things, so that, I can come to them and not say, what was it we were talking to about last time? I would come to them and say, hey, I realized that the last time we spoke, we were talking about the importance of a good diet, good exercise, and so on. And you recall I sent you a little pamphlet about cooking with love. So I always try to make a note, sometimes just in my contacts, about what someone is interested in, and sometimes just naturally I remember it because it's important, important to me. And then remembering names is something that a politician should work at. It comes better to some people than to others. But there's some primary rules about how to remember people's names, and you can study that. But the key things is that to remember someone's name, you have to have it first, and one of the key skills, I'll just pass on one of them, is just after you've met someone and they've introduced themselves, repeat their name back to them, so good to meet you, Matt, and then you can make associations with whatever, Matt has a good mat of hair. And
Thanks,
people won't see this, but it's true. And it's particularly true if they could see me, who doesn't have any hair.
That's awesome. So I don't want people to miss that, because I know it sounds so simplistic, but I want people to understand the magnitude of this, the importance of recognizing, remembering names, and also the note-taking ability. So, and this transcends politics, right? This is every area of life, but specifically politics and business. If you remember someone's name and something about them, your likability factor goes up. And they've done numerous studies over the years with different politicians that maybe some, and I'm not saying this is you, Terence, but I'm saying other individuals that they might not be, the person might not agree with them as a politician. They might not even like their policies, but they like them as a person. And the likability factor far outweighs political ideology. They've done numerous studies over the years on this. The likability factor is so unbelievably important. And whether you are a candidate, or you become an elected official, or you're a CEO of a company, I mean, companies tout all the time having a vibrant company culture. What better way to have an awesome culture than remember the names of your team members? members and understand a little bit about who they are, what makes them tick, what drives them, the stories that make them as people. A lot of that goes back to what you've done over the years, taking copious notes, whether it's, on pen to paper or whether it's in your phone. That's one of the advantages we have with technology, though different elements of technology has been to the demise of culture in many ways. It's been an asset that we have this device in the palm of our hand. We could check notes, different stories that we've heard, different experiences as we're going into a meeting. It just makes us, it sets us apart and gives us the opportunity to potentially connect on a deeper level. So I don't want people to miss that. It's so important to create a system, a documentation system, whether it's in someone's CRM, whether it's in Google Docs or Apple Notes, something that they could put in there to jot down notes that they can utilize for their benefit. So thank you for mentioning that, Terrence.
Certainly. When, if someone gives you a card, I have a software in my phone, cam card. I'm able to scan that and put it directly into my notes. In someone's contact information, I'm able to put notes in there when I talk to them, what they mentioned, so that's critical. And as a politician, as someone seeking someone else's vote, you have to realize people will vote for you for a number of different reasons. You mentioned that you're on the same policy page with someone. You support this issue and they support this issue, so they're going to vote for you. Sometimes it's just the fact that they had a conversation with you. Maybe it's at an event, maybe it's at the door, and they liked you. That's all they need to go out and to vote for this person. I remember, talking to people who just, came to the poll, and the only interaction with me was one time, but that's all they need. It can be a paper thin kind of reason. They know you, they met you, they liked you, they liked that conversation. And you're exactly right. This is true not only in politics, but in business. I think that you might have had someone on your podcast recently who mentioned the fact that they were going on a tour of a factory with a CEO. And all along the way, the CEO would stop, mention somebody by name, shake their hand, thank that person for doing a good job. And this company was killing it. The company culture, was supportive of the workers, and the workers came to work happy, and they wanted to contribute and make the company successful.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, the importance of listening tours, just going on tours to listen, not necessarily share information, but get feedback from people is so important. Yeah, that absolutely was covered. I do want to talk about after the fact when someone gets involved. Okay, so I've seen this too many times, and maybe you've seen the same thing, Terrence. Is that, well, first let me preface by saying I believe with what I've seen, most people that dive into the political world do it with the right intentions. Back to your point about different issues and starting from the bottom, a lot of individuals, their heart is in the right spot. Okay. Over time, because of the different structures we have, there tends to be like an inflation of ego, so to speak, where people can get very big heads and they can think of themselves better than other human beings. And it really creates a situation where it's that person against others. So for someone to stay grounded from a value perspective, what are some values that you'd recommend someone really hold on to through this process as let's say they do climb the political rungs, so to speak? What are some of those values that they should hold on to make sure that they're not distancing themselves from people? They aren't thinking themselves as a better person than other people, the people that the people that they're representing.
Well, obviously, humility is one. And I think one of the ways to stay grounded is to actually do writing, put out your thought processes and your values into the public forum, whether it's the local newspaper, whether it's your email, news blast. Tell people why you got involved at the very beginning, put that out into the community. And 3 or 4 years down the road, when you're starting to get that big head, that big ego, there'll be people that say, well, you said you got involved because you wanted to help people. And now you're talking about running for this so that you can make more money, and not talking about it, but maybe that's what you're thinking. And another way that's really kept me grounded is that my wife didn't care if I was commissioner or not. I was Terrence when I came home, and it didn't matter who called me commissioner or what I did that day. I still had to take the trash out.
That's awesome. So it keeps you grounded, right?
It does keep you grounded. And I've talked to other political candidates who, whose wives or whose husbands keep them grounded in fact that they have known them way back when you were there, and so
Sure.
Don't forget that.
Sure. One of the things I say often, because I've seen the importance of this, is don't focus on the word of the values, focus on the stories that exemplify those values, right? A lot of times companies will list out values, and here are our 5 company core values. And it's interesting because a lot of the team members, they don't even remember the values because there's no stickiness to them. But backing them with a story or a message regarding that value is really important. So as a different point, you had mentioned, every night when you got home, it's trash night, you take out the trash. There's an element of humility in that. Even though you were running a massive budget, you were spearheading initiatives in one of the most wealthy counties in the United States of America, you took the trash out. There's an element of humility with that, right? So I think it's really important that people do what you said, is put it out there to the general public saying, here are the values that I am going to adhere to, and then back it with a message regarding that value. Why does that value matter to you? And I think it's important to take not only common values, well, you can take like humility is a common value, but now I have that visual of Terrence Farrell took out his own trash, regardless of how influential he was, right? There's a picture that sticks with that value. So I appreciate you mentioned that, Terrence.
And don't forget the picture of the wife meeting me at the door, reminding me to take the trash out. That is the complete picture. It's not just Terrence Farrell coming home and taking out the trash. It's Terrence Farrell coming home into his home life, which is different from his political life in part, and having a home structure that supports those values, that someone there that can remember the stories before you became whoever you are. And I will say that when I was commissioner and soon after, I didn't really know how many people knew my first name was Terrence, because everybody greeted me as commissioner. So it was, I didn't really know if they actually knew I had a first name given to me by my parents, and not one that I assumed when I became a commissioner in 2008 for the first time.
That's an interesting. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I do think there's a point in there as well, I don't want people to lose sight of this, is that most people, like if we went into different gas stations across the United States and we pulled people aside, a quick poll, and we said, who's the president of the United States? If we pulled 10 people aside, hopefully the overwhelming majority of those people would be able to answer that question. What's interesting is if we did the same thing, how many of those 10 people would be able to list out their county commissioners? I mean, I'd be shocked if it was 3 out of the 10, just to give people an idea.
And beyond that, Matt, one of the questions I got all the time over my 12 years as a commissioner was, what does a county commissioner do? Not just who is a county commissioner, but what does a county commissioner do? And some people, I didn't realize that the county commissioner set the budget for our county taxes. I didn't realize that the commissioners, put up, authorized the building of the Justice Center, the courthouse in downtown Westchester. I didn't realize that commissioners, had an impact on, open space. I didn't realize that the commissioners did this. There are so many people that started our conversation. You mentioned work in the room with, well, glad to meet you, Terrence. What does a county commissioner do?
So just to give people, you mentioned the budget a few times, just to give people an idea, and it doesn't need to be exact, but ballpark figures, how large was the Chester County budget?
So the operating and the capital budget combined were about $500 million, $500 million plus dollars.
So for everyone listening, think about that, $500 million. So this is not small potatoes. This is an operation that's being led by people that have a profound impact on people's life in many, many different ways. So
Right.
I do want to challenge people. If you've ever wanted to get involved in politics, highly recommend doing what Terrence talked about, which is getting involved at the local level. So thank you for sharing that, Terrence. I feel like I have a lot of takeaways from our conversation today, and I know that other people took stuff out of this conversation as well. There's three in particular that are going to be my kind of walking away from this conversation, what I'm going to remember. So I just want to highlight those before we close. Is you mentioned you starting at the bottom, okay, kind of working your way up to having that massive impact that you had over the last, 2 decades of your public service. You also mentioned it could start with issues as well. So people could either jump in starting at the bottom, or they pick an issue that is really near and dear to their heart and use that as a rally cry to get into the political arena. And I appreciate you mentioned that. The second is the importance of people. I know it sounds simplistic, but just remembering people's names and then taking notes, actually creating a system to document the different conversations and stories that we hear. I think that's really important. And then the third piece was about putting your values out into the public, just so people can read them, they can see them, they can understand what you value, and then attaching a story or a message to that value, painting a picture in someone's mind on why does that person believe so strongly in humility or integrity, paint the picture regarding it. So those are going to be my 3 takeaways. So Terrence, thanks again for your time. I know you're an extremely busy person, so thank you for your time again. If someone wants to get a little bit more information on you, they want to connect with you, where's the best place they can go to do that?
The best place is my LinkedIn profile, and perhaps you can put it in the comments or someplace near this podcast. And as you know, Matt, because you were involved in the political arena also, and you have made the transition to business, some of these things you mentioned you're very familiar with too. So I appreciate your bringing me on the program to speak about the importance of getting involved in politics to make the community a better place. It doesn't happen without civic engagement.
100%. And I am a huge fan of getting more sane people involved in the political process. So thank you, Terrence. I appreciate your time today.
I appreciate that inference too.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.